In the early years of the 21st century, the world had become more connected than at any other time in human history. Information traveled instantly across borders. Historical archives were digitized. Voices that once remained local could now be heard globally. As a result, objects linked to empire and conquest began to receive renewed attention, not only from historians, but from ordinary people trying to understand how the modern world had been shaped. The Koh-i-Noor stood near the center of these conversations. For many visitors viewing the diamond in Britain, it appeared at first as a distant relic, beautiful, carefully protected, and surrounded by ceremony. Yet the more its story became widely known, the harder it was to see the stone as neutral. Its journey had crossed regions that were now independent nations, each carrying memories of rule, resistance, and loss. Because of this, the diamond gradually shifted from being only a royal jewel to becoming a symbol discussed in politics, culture, and identity. India was among the first countries to raise formal public interest in the diamond's return after independence. The request was not constant, nor always part of official negotiation, but it appeared repeatedly across decades, in speeches, articles, and cultural debate. Supporters of repatriation argued that the diamond represented a historical wrong tied to colonial rule and unequal treaties. To them, its presence in Britain symbolized a chapter of domination that had never been fully resolved. Pakistan also expressed claims pointing to the diamond's final transfer from Lahore, a city now within its borders. Afghan voices, remembering the Durrani rulers who once possessed the stone, added further historical connection. Each claim rested on a different moment in the diamond's long passage through empire, and each reflected a desire to reclaim part of a fragmented past. Britain's position remained largely consistent. Officials emphasized the legality of 19th-century agreements and the complexity of determining ownership after centuries of movement between rulers. They also argued that the diamond had become part of a shared global heritage accessible to millions of visitors. In this view, its display in London allowed the world, not only one nation, to encounter its history. These differing perspectives did not lead to resolution. Instead, they revealed how a single object could hold multiple truths at once. The Koh-i-Noor was simultaneously a work of nature, a product of empire, a royal symbol, and a reminder of colonial extraction. None of these meanings fully erased the others. As debate continued, scholars looked more carefully at the idea of the curse long associated with the diamond. Stories claimed that male rulers who possessed it often faced violent downfall. Nader Shah assassinated, Afghan kings exiled, Sikh sovereignty lost. Some believed the stone should only be worn by queens to avoid misfortune. Yet historians noted that powerful rulers across history frequently met tragic ends, whether or not jewels were involved. The curse, they suggested, revealed more about human attempts to explain suffering than about the diamond itself. Still, legends endure because they give emotional shape to history. The idea of a cursed jewel captured something true in a symbolic sense. Wherever the Koh-i-Noor traveled, it became entangled with ambition, conflict, and the rise and fall of power. Even without supernatural force, its path reflected the instability of empire. Public awareness of these layers deepened as museums and media began presenting more complex historical narratives. Exhibitions placed imperial objects within broader context, acknowledging conquest alongside craftsmanship. Documentaries traced the diamond's movement through centuries of war and negotiation. Younger generations encountered the story not only as spectacle, but as a question about justice and memory. At the same time, global attitudes toward cultural restitution slowly evolved. Some European institutions returned artifacts taken during colonial campaigns. Others entered long negotiations or created shared custody agreements. Each case unfolded differently, shaped by law, diplomacy, and public opinion. The Koh-i-Noor remained among the most sensitive examples, precisely because its history touched several modern nations at once. While governments debated, the diamond itself remained unchanged, silent inside controlled light, unaffected by arguments spoken in languages from across the world. Its physical stillness contrasted sharply with the emotional movement surrounding it. In this way, the Koh-i-Noor revealed a quiet truth. Objects endure, but meanings never stay fixed. During these decades, the Koh-i-Noor rarely appeared in public discussion compared with more immediate political concerns. Yet it remained part of the symbolic background of empire, visible in royal ceremonies, coronations, and state imagery that attempted to project stability even as the imperial system faced mounting pressure. The decisive turning point came after World War II. The conflict exhausted European powers economically and militarily. Maintaining overseas empires became increasingly difficult. At the same time, independence movements had grown stronger and more organized. In 1947, British rule in India came to an end. Two new nations, India and Pakistan, emerged from the partition of the subcontinent, accompanied by one of the largest and most painful migrations in modern history. Violence, displacement, and uncertainty marked the transition from empire to independence. With sovereignty restored, historical memory took on renewed urgency. Nations newly responsible for their own futures began re-examining the past, including the legacy of colonial rule and the fate of cultural treasures removed during that period. Among the most famous of these treasures was the Koh-i-Noor. Requests for its return began to appear in diplomatic and public conversation. India, Pakistan, and later Afghanistan each expressed claims rooted in different chapters of the diamond's history. Arguments drew upon inheritance, geography, and moral responsibility. Britain, for its part, maintained that the transfer had been legal under 19th century treaties. No resolution emerged. Instead, the diamond entered a new phase of existence, no longer moving between empires through conquest, but remaining fixed within a debate shaped by law, memory, and identity. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, the British Empire itself continued to change. Former colonies across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean gained independence. The global system shifted from imperial rule toward international diplomacy among sovereign states. Britain redefined its role, focusing less on territorial control and more on political and economic partnership. Within this transformed world, the Koh-i-Noor's meaning grew quieter yet deeper. It was rarely discussed in daily politics, but it remained present in moments of ceremony, embedded in royal crowns associated with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and later displayed among the crown jewels. Visitors viewed it behind glass, often aware of its beauty, but only gradually learning the complexity of its past. Historical scholarship also expanded during this period. Researchers examined colonial archives, regional histories, and cultural memory with increasing care. Their work did not always agree, but it revealed how many perspectives surrounded a single object. The diamond's journey could be told as imperial triumph, tragic loss, political negotiation, or shared heritage, depending on the storyteller. By the early 21st century, global conversations about cultural restitution had become more visible. Museums, governments, and communities debated the return of artifacts taken during colonial expansion. Some objects were repatriated, others remained contested. Each case reflected unique legal, historical, and ethical questions. The Koh-i-Noor stood among the most famous unresolved examples. Its long path, from Indian mines to Mughal courts, from Persian conquest to Afghan and Sikh rule, and finally to Britain, made simple ownership difficult to define. Every stage of its journey connected to real historical power, yet none could fully erase the claims of the others. Despite these debates, the diamond itself remained unchanged. It did not respond to politics or memory. It reflected light, as it always had, silent within the glass cases and ceremonial crowns that now defined its public life. Visitors continued to gather before it, drawn by reputation as much as by brilliance. Some saw beauty, some saw empire, some saw unanswered history. And beyond the museum walls, the modern world kept moving. Nations rising, alliances forming, conflicts appearing and fading, while a stone that had once traveled through conquest now rested in stillness, waiting within a new century where questions about the past would only grow more persistent and where the final meaning of the Koh-i-Noor had yet to be decided. During the later 19th century, the British Empire continued to expand in confidence and reach. Industrial power strengthened its economy, naval dominance secured global trade routes, and colonial administration extended across vast regions of Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Within this system, royal ceremony played an important symbolic role. Objects like crowns, thrones, and regalia were not merely decorative. They helped present imperial authority as ancient, stable, and unquestioned. The Koh-i-Noor gradually became part of this symbolic language. After its recutting in London, the diamond was incorporated into royal jewelry connected with Queen Victoria, whose reign came to represent the height of British imperial influence. Although the stone's earlier history stretched across South Asian empires, public presentation in Britain focused on its brilliance rather than its journey. Display cases, illustrations, and ceremonial settings emphasized beauty and rarity, allowing the violence and negotiation that had carried it to Europe to fade into the background of official storytelling. Yet history outside Britain was moving in a different direction. Across the Indian subcontinent, British rule brought administrative change, new legal systems, railways, and expanding communication networks. At the same time, it produced deep political and economic tensions. Traditional authorities lost power. Resources were redirected toward imperial priorities. Cultural and religious differences sometimes intensified under colonial governance. These pressures contributed to the Indian Rebellion of 1857, a widespread uprising involving soldiers, regional leaders, and civilians. Although the rebellion was eventually suppressed, it transformed the structure of British control. Authority passed from the East India Company directly to the British Crown, beginning the period known as the British Raj. India was no longer governed by a trading corporation, but by the monarchy itself. Within this new imperial framework, the Koh-i-Noor's symbolism grew more complex. For British audiences, it could represent continuity between ancient monarchy and modern empire. For many in India, however, the diamond increasingly symbolized something different: loss of sovereignty and the transfer of power to distant rulers. These interpretations did not always appear in official debate, but they persisted quietly in memory and conversation. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, global politics began to shift. Industrial competition increased among European powers. Nationalist movements grew stronger in colonized regions. New ideas about self-determination and political representation spread through education, print culture, and public discussion. In India, leaders such as Dadabhai Naoroji, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and later Mahatma Gandhi encouraged forms of resistance that ranged from political advocacy to nonviolent protest. Their goals differed in method, but they shared a belief that imperial rule could not last forever. Within this atmosphere, historical symbols gained renewed importance. Objects connected to conquest, land, monuments, and treasures became part of broader conversations about justice and memory. The Koh-i-Noor remained physically distant from these debates, secured within British royal collections. Yet its story was increasingly cited as an example of how power had shifted during the colonial era. Questions emerged slowly. Who had the right to possess such an object? Could a treaty signed under defeat be considered legitimate? Did cultural heritage belong to empires, or to the regions where it originated? These questions did not produce immediate political change, but they marked a transformation in awareness. For the first time in generations, the diamond was being discussed not only as a jewel, but as history. Meanwhile, Britain itself was entering a period of uncertainty. The early 20th century brought World War I, a conflict that reshaped empires across Europe and the Middle East. Millions died, economies weakened, and long-standing political structures began to fracture. Although Britain emerged among the victors, the war strained its resources and altered global perceptions of imperial permanence. Between the two world wars, calls for independence intensified in many colonies. In India, mass movements organized boycotts, protests, and negotiations aimed at ending British rule. The struggle combined political strategy with moral argument, presenting independence as both a practical necessity and an ethical demand. The voyage itself was long and uneasy. Accounts from the journey describe illness aboard the ship and concern among those responsible for transporting such a valuable object. Whether through coincidence or later storytelling, these difficulties added to the growing belief that the diamond carried misfortune with it wherever it traveled. When the stone finally reached England, it entered a world very different from the courts of Delhi or Lahore. Britain in the mid-19th century stood at the center of an expanding global empire. Industrialization was transforming cities. Trade networks connected continents. Political confidence was high. Yet public reaction to the Koh-i-Noor was complex. Many in Britain saw it as a symbol of imperial achievement, proof of power extending across distant lands. Others questioned the circumstances of its acquisition, wondering whether a treasure taken from a child ruler could truly be considered a gift. These debates, quiet at first, would grow louder in later generations. In 1851, the diamond was displayed at the Great Exhibition in London, an event designed to celebrate industry, progress, and empire. Visitors came expecting overwhelming brilliance from the legendary stone. Some left disappointed. The diamond, still cut in an older style, did not reflect light in the way European audiences anticipated. This response led to a decision that permanently altered the gem. Under the direction of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, the Koh-i-Noor was recut to increase its brilliance. The process reduced its size significantly, sacrificing weight for greater sparkle according to contemporary European taste. The transformation symbolized more than aesthetics. Just as the diamond had been physically reshaped, its cultural meaning was being reshaped as well, shifted from an object of Asian imperial history into a jewel of the British crown. After recutting, the stone was set into royal regalia associated with Queen Victoria. From that moment forward, it became part of Britain's ceremonial identity, appearing in crowns worn by female members of the royal family rather than reigning kings. Traditions soon formed around this choice, influenced by the long history of violent misfortune experienced by many male rulers who had possessed the gem. Whether coincidence, legend, or political symbolism, the pattern reinforced the growing myth of a curse, a belief that the diamond brought suffering to powerful men while sparing queens. Meanwhile, far from London, memory of the stone did not fade. Across India, Afghanistan, and Persia, the Koh-i-Noor remained part of historical consciousness, connected to lost empires and interrupted sovereignty. As the 19th century progressed and resistance to colonial rule slowly developed, the diamond's story began to carry new meaning. It was no longer only a royal jewel. It became a reminder of conquest. By the early 20th century, movements for independence were reshaping political life across South Asia. Leaders and thinkers reconsidered the past, examining how authority had shifted from local dynasties to foreign rule. Within these reflections, the journey of the Koh-i-Noor stood as a powerful symbol, small in size, yet immense in implication. Still, in Britain, the diamond remained largely understood through ceremony rather than controversy. It appeared in coronations and royal displays, embedded in traditions that presented empire as orderly and permanent. Generations grew up seeing it as part of national heritage, distant from the conflicts that had once surrounded it. Time moved forward, as it always had. Empires changed, borders shifted, new nations emerged where older kingdoms had fallen, and through all of it, the Koh-i-Noor endured, unchanged in substance, yet constantly changing in meaning, resting far from the rivers and mines where its story had first begun, as the modern world slowly approached a moment when the past would be questioned more directly than ever before. By the early 19th century, the balance of power across the Indian subcontinent was shifting in ways few earlier rulers could have imagined. For centuries, authority had passed between dynasties rooted in the region itself or arriving through land-based conquest from Central Asia and Persia. Now, a different kind of force was expanding, one that did not begin as a traditional empire at all. The British East India Company had first arrived as a commercial enterprise, interested in trade rather than direct rule. Its merchants negotiated with local authorities, built coastal settlements, and slowly increased their influence through alliances and economic leverage. Yet over time, commerce and power became inseparable. To protect trade, the company raised armies. To manage territory, it signed treaties. To secure stability, it intervened in regional politics. By the time the Koh-i-Noor entered the treasury of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in 1813, the company already controlled vast areas of India. Still, Punjab remained outside its authority. Ranjit Singh's kingdom stood as one of the last strong, independent states in the region, militarily disciplined, politically organized, and cautious in its dealings with foreign powers. For the remainder of Ranjit Singh's life, this balance held. He maintained diplomatic relations with the British while preserving sovereignty within his borders. His court in Lahore continued to display wealth and ceremonial splendor, and the Koh-i-Noor remained among the most valued symbols of his rule. Visitors described the Maharaja wearing the diamond on special occasions, not merely as ornament but as visible proof of legitimacy inherited from the great empires of the past. Yet the stability of Punjab depended heavily on a single figure. When Ranjit Singh died in 1839, the structure he had built began to weaken almost immediately. Succession disputes, court rivalries, and shifting military loyalties created uncertainty at the center of power. Within a few years, several rulers rose and fell in rapid succession, some dying through intrigue or violence. Authority fragmented, and confidence in governance declined. To observers in British-controlled territories, the situation appeared increasingly unstable. Company officials watched carefully, aware that disorder in Punjab could threaten their northern frontier or present an opportunity to extend influence. Tension grew along the borders between the Sikh state and British territory, shaped by mistrust on both sides. This tension eventually led to open conflict. In 1845, war broke out between the Sikh Empire and the East India Company. Fierce battles followed, marked by heavy losses and uncertain outcomes. Although Sikh forces fought with determination, internal divisions weakened coordination. By 1846, the conflict ended with British victory and the signing of the Treaty of Lahore. The treaty did not immediately erase the Sikh kingdom, but it placed the state under British supervision and demanded significant concessions. Territory was ceded. Payments were required. Political influence shifted. Most importantly, the future of Punjab and of the Koh-i-Noor moved closer to British control. In the years that followed, instability continued within the Sikh administration. A child ruler, Maharaja Duleep Singh, now sat on the throne, too young to govern independently. Real authority rested with regents and advisors operating under British oversight. Distrust deepened, and a second conflict erupted in 1848. The Second Anglo-Sikh War ended the independence of the Sikh Empire. By 1849, Punjab was formally annexed into British territory. The long sequence of regional powers that had once controlled northern India, Mughal, Afghan, Sikh, had come to an end. In their place stood a colonial authority extending across most of the subcontinent. Within this transformation, the fate of the Koh-i-Noor was decided not through battle, but through legal language. The revised Treaty of Lahore included a specific clause requiring that the famous diamond be surrendered to the British Crown. Officially, it was presented as part of the settlement between defeated rulers and the victorious company. Yet even at the time, the transfer carried symbolic weight far beyond diplomacy. For centuries, the diamond had moved through conquest from dynasty to dynasty, empire to empire. Now it would leave South Asia entirely. The young Dalip Singh, still a child, was required to give up the stone that had represented sovereignty in his kingdom. In 1850, the Koh-i-Noor began its journey toward Britain, carried across oceans rather than mountains, guarded not by imperial armies but by colonial authority. To the northwest, in Persia, a military leader named Nader Shah rose from obscurity through discipline and relentless campaigning. By the 1730s, he controlled a powerful army and had restored Persian strength after years of instability. His ambitions extended beyond defense. He sought wealth and recognition equal to the great conquerors of earlier centuries. Reports of Mughal riches reached his court, stories of treasuries filled with gold and jewels gathered over generations. In 1739, Nader Shah led his forces across the mountains into northern India. Mughal resistance collapsed after defeat near Karnal, opening the road to Delhi. The entry of Persian troops into the imperial capital marked a turning point remembered for shock and devastation. Order broke down. Violence spread. When the looting finally ended, enormous quantities of treasure had been seized, objects representing centuries of Mughal power. Among them was the Great Diamond. Tradition holds that upon seeing the stone's brilliance, Nader Shah named it Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light. Whether recorded precisely or shaped by later storytelling, the name endured, attaching permanent identity to a gem that had previously moved through history under changing descriptions. Its removal from Delhi symbolized more than the loss of wealth. It revealed that the Mughal Empire, once dominant across South Asia, could no longer protect the treasures at the center of its authority. Though the dynasty would survive in weakened form, its age of unquestioned supremacy had ended. The diamond now traveled west with Nader Shah's army, leaving behind the palaces where it had rested during Mughal splendor. Yet stability did not follow it. In 1747, Nader Shah was assassinated. His empire fractured almost immediately as commanders and relatives fought for control. Once again, the diamond passed into uncertain hands, this time into the possession of Ahmad Shah Durrani, who soon founded a new Afghan empire. Carried across mountains into Afghanistan, the stone entered another political world shaped by tribal alliances and shifting authority. Generations of Durrani rulers held it as a symbol of legitimacy, yet leadership struggles remained common. Power changed hands through conflict, exile, and negotiation. Over time, the diamond's history became increasingly linked with instability. Whether coincidence or later interpretation, stories began to suggest that misfortune followed those who tried to possess it, especially male rulers whose reigns ended violently or in defeat. Eventually, the stone came into the custody of Shah Shuja Durrani, a deposed Afghan ruler seeking support to regain his throne. His search for protection led him southeast toward the rising strength of the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Ranjit Singh had unified much of Punjab through military skill and political strategy, creating a state strong enough to resist both Afghan influence and the growing presence of European power in India. His court in Lahore became known for discipline, wealth, and careful governance. When Shah Shuja arrived in exile, negotiations followed. Protection and assistance were offered, but only in exchange for the surrender of the famous diamond. In 1813, the Koh-i-Noor entered the treasury of Ranjit Singh. For the first time in generations, the stone rested within a relatively stable and independent South Asian kingdom. Ranjit Singh valued it as a symbol equal to the great imperial treasures of the past, a sign that his rule stood alongside the Mughal emperors and earlier conquerors who had possessed it. Yet beyond the borders of Punjab, another power was already expanding. Not a traditional kingdom, but a trading corporation with armies, treaties, and growing political ambition. And its presence would soon reshape the destiny of the diamond once again. In the decades that followed, the Mughal Empire did not appear fragile. Instead, it entered a long period of strength that later historians would remember as one of the most stable and prosperous eras in the history of South Asia. Imperial authority became more organized, systems of taxation more reliable, and regional leaders more closely connected to the court at the center of power. This transformation unfolded most clearly during the reign of Emperor Akbar, who ruled from the middle of the 16th century. Akbar inherited an empire that was still uncertain in its foundations, but through careful administration and political flexibility, he turned it into a durable state. He brought former rivals into alliance, encouraged cooperation among different religious and cultural communities, and created governing institutions that could manage vast territories. Under Akbar, the Mughal court became known not only for military success, but also for intellectual and artistic life. Scholars, poets, and craftsmen gathered around imperial patronage. Trade routes connected the empire to Central Asia, Persia, and the growing commercial networks of Europe. Wealth flowed inward, and with it came precious materials, silk, spices, metals, and gemstones. Among these treasures, diamonds remained especially significant. Their rarity and durability made them powerful symbols of rule. When displayed in court ceremonies or mounted in royal objects, they communicated permanence, an image every empire hoped to project. By the early 17th century, Mughal authority passed to Shah Jahan, whose reign is often remembered for architectural beauty and refined court culture. The construction of the Taj Mahal became the most famous expression of this period, yet it was only one part of a broader effort to present imperial rule as orderly, radiant, and divinely favored. Shah Jahan's court placed increasing importance on visual splendor. Ceremonies were carefully staged. Textiles, jewels, and precious metals were arranged to reflect light in controlled and symbolic ways. The emperor did not simply govern. He appeared before his subjects as the living center of a harmonious universe. Nothing represented this vision more clearly than the peacock throne, created as a ceremonial seat unlike anything the region had seen before. Crafted from gold and covered with rare gemstones gathered across generations, the throne embodied the accumulated wealth of the Mughal world. Descriptions from visitors speak of rubies glowing red in lamplight, emeralds cut with precision, and diamonds placed where their brightness would be most visible. Within this environment of extraordinary treasure, the Great Diamond, later known as the Koh-i-Noor, occupied a place of quiet importance. Whether mounted in the throne itself or preserved nearby in the imperial treasury, it existed at the symbolic heart of Mughal sovereignty. For a time, the empire's future seemed secure. European merchants arriving by sea described thriving ports and crowded markets. Agricultural production supported immense populations. Roads and administrative systems allowed communication across long distances. Compared with many contemporary states, the Mughal Empire appeared both wealthy and stable. Yet beneath that appearance, familiar pressures were slowly building. Large empires require constant balance between expansion and control, taxation and loyalty, authority and distance. Even during prosperity, small strains can accumulate unnoticed. These tensions became visible after Shah Jahan fell ill in the 1650s. A violent struggle for succession erupted among his sons, each commanding armies and regional support. The conflict ended when Aurangzeb defeated his rivals and imprisoned his father, claiming the throne for himself. Aurangzeb proved to be a disciplined and determined ruler, expanding Mughal territory farther than ever before. But expansion came at great cost. Continuous military campaigns drained resources. Resistance movements grew in distant regions. Governing such a vast empire demanded increasing effort. When Aurangzeb died in 1707, the Mughal state still possessed wealth and territory, yet its internal balance had weakened. Later emperors struggled to maintain authority over provincial leaders who had grown more independent. Court politics became unstable. The confidence that had once defined Mughal rule slowly faded. It was during this period of gradual decline that events beyond India's borders began to shape the empire's fate. By this stage, the stone was no longer simply a religious or ceremonial object. In imperial courts, gemstones functioned as visible proof of sovereignty. They appeared in crowns, thrones, and ceremonial ornaments used during public audiences. A ruler surrounded by extraordinary jewels projected stability, divine approval, and control over vast resources. Yet, the Delhi Sultanate itself was not permanent. Like the kingdoms before it, it faced internal struggles, rebellions, and external threats. Political authority in medieval India remained fluid, shaped by warfare as much as administration. During the early 16th century, a new figure entered this landscape from Central Asia, Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur. A descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, Babur sought to establish a lasting empire after years of conflict in Central Asia. In 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi at the First Battle of Panipat, marking the beginning of what would become the Mughal Empire. Babur's own memoirs, the Baburnama, include one of the earliest widely accepted references to a large and famous diamond in northern India. While historians still debate whether this stone was truly the later Koh-i-Noor, the description suggests a gem of exceptional importance already circulating among ruling elites. If the identification is correct, the diamond had now entered a new historical phase. The Mughal Empire would grow into one of the wealthiest and most culturally influential states of the early modern world. Its rulers sponsored architecture, painting, literature, and trade on an immense scale. Imperial treasuries expanded alongside territorial power. Under the Mughals, precious stones were carefully catalogued, displayed, and incorporated into royal symbolism. Jewels decorated weapons, clothing, and ceremonial objects. They communicated authority in a language understood across cultures from Persia to Europe. Within this environment, the great diamond's significance would only increase. No longer hidden in temples or uncertain courts, it now existed at the center of an empire that connected South Asia to global trade and diplomacy. But the Mughal story itself had not yet reached its height. Babur's successors would expand the empire far beyond its original borders. Future emperors would construct cities of marble and gardens designed to mirror paradise. And within those splendors, the diamond would gain a clearer identity, one tied permanently to imperial power. For now, however, much about the stone remained uncertain. Its exact size, shape, and setting changed over time as rulers recut and remounted their jewels. Historical records from this early period are incomplete, leaving gaps that later legend would eagerly fill. What is clear is that by the 16th century, the diamond was already part of the political imagination of empire. It had traveled from geological silence into human conflict, from hidden earth into royal display. And like the empires surrounding it, its future would depend on forces far beyond the intentions of any single ruler. The centuries ahead would bring extraordinary wealth to the Mughal court, but also invasion, betrayal, and collapse. Each transformation of power would pull the diamond into a new chapter of history, carrying it farther from the land where it first emerged. For the moment, though, the empire was still young. Its authority was not yet secure. Across the mountains to the west and the plains to the north, rival powers watched carefully, waiting for opportunity. The diamond remained where imperial strength had placed it, quiet, valuable, and already surrounded by stories that would grow darker with time, as the Mughal world slowly moved toward the height of its glory, unaware of how suddenly that glory could end. In the decades that followed, the Mughal Empire did not appear fragile. Instead, it entered a period that later historians would describe as one of the great ages of early modern civilization. Power became more organized, wealth more visible, and imperial culture more refined. Cities expanded, trade increased, and the authority of the emperor reached across vast territories of the Indian subcontinent. Under Akbar, Babur's grandson, the empire achieved a level of stability that earlier rulers had struggled to secure. Akbar reorganized administration, brought regional leaders into alliance, and encouraged a political culture that could govern diverse populations. His court became known not only for military strength, but also for discussion, learning, and artistic patronage. Within this expanding imperial world, precious stones gained even greater symbolic importance. Jewels were not simply decoration. They were part of a visual language of rule, displayed during ceremonies, embedded in weapons, and set into thrones that represented the center of authority. Long before the first cities rose on the Indian subcontinent, before kings ruled from stone palaces or priests filled temples with gold, the land itself was already ancient. Rivers had been shaping the soil for millions of years. Mountains had risen and worn away again. Beneath that quiet surface, deep within layers of rock formed under immense heat and pressure, small crystals of carbon slowly changed into something far more enduring. Among them was a single stone that would one day be known as the Koh-i-Noor. For most of Earth's history, that stone remained hidden. No human eye saw it, no story described it. It existed in complete silence, unchanged while entire species appeared and disappeared above it. When human civilizations finally began to take shape across South Asia, they did not yet know what lay beneath their feet. Early farming communities settled along fertile rivers. Trade routes slowly formed between distant regions. Over centuries, small kingdoms grew into powerful states, each competing for land, wealth, and influence. By the first millennium, the Indian subcontinent had become one of the richest cultural regions in the world. Its cities were centers of learning, religion, and craftsmanship. Temples were built not only as places of worship, but also as symbols of royal authority and prosperity. Inside them, rulers placed offerings of gold, silver, and precious stones, gifts meant to honor the divine and display earthly power at the same time. Diamonds held a special place among these treasures. Unlike softer gemstones, they did not fade or scratch easily. Their clarity and strength made them seem almost supernatural. Ancient Indian texts described diamonds as objects connected to fate, protection, and cosmic order. To possess a remarkable diamond was not simply to own wealth. It suggested divine favor. Most of the world's known diamonds at that time came from a specific region in south-central India that would later be called Golconda. The land there was dry and difficult, yet rivers carried gravel rich with hidden stones. Miners worked patiently, washing sediment and searching for faint flashes of light among ordinary rock. Discoveries were rare, but when they happened, the stones often traveled far beyond the mines where they were found. Merchants carried them along trade networks that stretched across Asia and the Middle East. Some reached royal courts. A few entered temple treasuries. And the largest stones, those of unusual size or clarity, quickly became objects of political importance. At some uncertain point in the distant past, the diamond, later called the Koh-i-Noor, emerged from this world of mines, trade, and royal wealth. The exact moment is lost to history. No surviving record describes its discovery with certainty. Instead, historians must rely on fragments of evidence, later chronicles, and traditions preserved through storytelling. Many scholars believe the stone was already known in medieval India and may have been associated with the Kakatiya dynasty, which ruled parts of southern India until the early 14th century. The Kakatiya rulers were famous for their temples and accumulated treasure. Like other powerful kingdoms of the time, they stored immense wealth in sacred complexes that also functioned as political and economic centers. If the diamond was indeed part of their treasury, it would have existed in a world shaped by ritual, hierarchy, and constant military threat. South Asia in this period was not a single unified empire, but a landscape of competing states. Alliances shifted. Wars were frequent. Victory often meant seizing not only land, but also sacred and royal wealth. This instability became even more significant as new powers expanded from the north. Turco-Persian dynasties pushing into the subcontinent sought control over its prosperous cities and trade routes. Campaigns of conquest brought destruction to some regions and new political systems to others. Temples and treasuries, symbols of rival authority, were especially vulnerable during these invasions. Somewhere within these centuries of conflict and transition, the Great Diamond changed hands. It likely moved from a southern kingdom into the possession of northern rulers connected to the Delhi Sultanate, the powerful state that dominated much of India from the 13th to the early 16th century.